pressure alarm chirped twice before Dr. Helena Voss noticed it. 3 days at 11,000 meters had dulled her responses to the habitat's constant symphony of mechanical complaints. She looked up from her workstation, eyes burning from 16 straight hours analyzing cable samples, and checked the gauge. Within acceptable parameters. Everything was always within acceptable parameters in Trident Station, right up until the moment it wasn't. "Coffee's burnt again," said Marcus Chen, the lead structural engineer, emerging from the communications pod. "Tastes like battery acid filtered through a gym sock." "That's the water reclamation system," Helena replied without looking up. "After 3 days, we're basically drinking our own sweat with caffeine added." "Beautiful. Remind me why the Foundation couldn't just send ROVs for this job?" "Because SCP-701 Alpha severed the cable at a depth where standard remotely operated vehicles can't maintain stability. Because the Trans-Pacific data line carries 17% of the Foundation's encrypted traffic between sites in North America and East Asia. Because if we don't repair it within the week, Operations Command will have to reroute through commercial satellites that are considerably less secure." Helena finally met his eyes. "And because saturation diving protocols mean we're already compressed to ambient pressure, we can stay down here for weeks if necessary. ROVs need constant surface support." Marcus poured himself a cup of the offending coffee anyway. "What I love about you, Doc, is your unwavering optimism." The habitat groaned. Not the usual settling sounds they'd grown accustomed to, but a deep, resonant vibration that traveled through the reinforced hull and into their bones. Both of them froze. "That's new," Marcus said quietly. Helena was already moving to the monitoring station, her fingers dancing across the pressure sensors, structural integrity displays, and external cameras. The screens showed nothing but absolute darkness beyond their small bubble of light. At this depth, even their high-powered floods penetrated only a few meters into water so compressed it had the density of molten lead. Pressures stable, hull integrity nominal, external temperature holding at 2 degrees Celsius. She cycled through the camera feeds. Nothing, just the endless, suffocating black. "Probably thermal adjustment. The seafloor here is—" "We're not on the seafloor," interrupted a voice from the dive prep chamber. Thomas Reeves, their third team member and the Foundation's most experienced saturation diver, emerged in thermal underlayers. His weathered face was unreadable. "Haven't been for the last 6 hours. Helena felt her stomach tighten. "What are you talking about? The anchoring system shows—" "The anchoring system shows we're secured to something solid. I didn't say we weren't anchored. I said we're not on the seafloor." Marcus set down his coffee. "Tom, you've been in decompression for 30 hours. Maybe you should." "I've been down here longer than both of you combined," Thomas said, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years diving for the Foundation. "I know what rock feels like under magnetic anchors. I know what sediment sounds like. This isn't either." The habitat groaned again, longer this time. Helena's coffee cup vibrated across her desk. "Show me," she said. Thomas led them to the starboard porthole, one of 3 reinforced observation windows built into Trident Station's hull. Each was 40 centimeters across, made of synthetic sapphire layered with transparent aluminum alloy, rated to withstand pressures that would crush a nuclear submarine. Through it, they could see perhaps 3 meters into the abyss, illuminated by external floods. At first, Helena saw nothing unusual, just the gray-black expanse that might be rock or sediment or the edge of nothing. Then Thomas adjusted the flood angle, and she understood. The surface beneath them had texture, not the random, fractal complexity of stone, but something else. Repeating patterns, ridges that ran parallel for meters before disappearing into darkness, and something that might have been indentations, circular and regular, each the size of a dinner plate. "Those look like," Marcus started. "Scales," Thomas finished. "Or something analogous. I've been watching them for 3 hours. They move." "That's impossible," Helena said, but her voice lacked conviction. Nothing biological could survive the pressure at this depth. Nothing large enough to. The sonar pinged. They all turned toward the navigation station where the acoustic mapping system had been running continuously since their descent. Helena crossed to it in 4 steps, her mind already racing through explanations. Whale, Thermal layer, equipment malfunction, anything except what the screen was showing her. The sonar painted a picture in shades of green and black. Trident Station sat at the center, a bright rectangular blob. The seafloor, or what they thought was seafloor, extended in all directions. Encircling them, at a distance of approximately 200 meters, was a contact. A biological contact. Helena cycled through the sensor readings 3 times, certain she was misreading them. The contact's acoustic signature indicated something massive and organic. The size estimate made her hands go cold. "That can't be right," she whispered. "What is it?" Marcus was at her shoulder now. "The system's registering a biological mass, single organism. Length estimate is," she swallowed, "somewhere between 180 and 220 meters. That's bigger than a blue whale. That's bigger than 3 blue whales." Helena pulled up the tracking history. It's been there for at least 4 hours since the last system check. Just circling, constant distance, constant speed. "Hunting pattern," Thomas said from the porthole. The word hung in the recycled air like a curse. Helena forced herself to think clinically. She was a Foundation xenobiologist, with clearances that let her study things that would drive civilian scientists mad. She'd seen organisms that violated every known law of nature. This was just another anomaly, just another SCP to be documented and understood. Except she was 11,000 meters underwater, in a habitat the size of a small bus, and something the length of a cargo ship was circling them in the dark. "We need to contact the surface," Marcus said. "Communications are down," Thomas reminded them. "Have been since the cable splice failed yesterday. That's why we're here, remember?" The emergency beacon has a range of 5 kilometers in these conditions. The support vessel is sitting at safe depth, 15 kilometers up. We're on our own until the scheduled check-in tomorrow at 0600. Helena made herself breathe slowly. Panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. "All right, protocol. We're Foundation personnel in potential contact with an unknown biological anomaly. Thomas, you continue monitoring the exterior. Marcus, I need you to check all hull seals and backup systems. I'm going to start documentation." "Documentation," Marcus repeated. "It's circling us like we're prey, and you want to write a report?" "I want to do my job," Helena said sharply, "which is to observe, record, and survive, in that order." They separated to their tasks. Helena pulled out her personal recorder, old-school audio, no digital signature to corrupt, and began speaking in the clipped, professional tone that had been drilled into her during Foundation training. "Dr. Helena Voss, Xenobiology Specialist, Site 17. Date is September 14th, 2024. Time is 22:30 hours. Location is Trident Station, Mariana Trench, depth 11,100 meters. I am documenting a potential encounter with an unidentified biological entity. Preliminary designation SCP-7701, Bravo." She continued speaking, describing the sonar contact, the strange texture beneath their habitat, the circling pattern. The act of documentation helped. It transformed the situation from nightmare to data, from terror to science. The habitat groaned again. This time, it didn't stop. The sound built slowly, a basso profundo that resonated through every surface. Helena's teeth ached with it. Her coffee cup walked across the desk and shattered on the floor. The lights flickered. "Pressure spike!" Marcus shouted from the engineering station. "External sensors showing, Jesus, showing 15% over ambient. That's not possible." Helena grabbed a handhold as the floor tilted slightly. "Nothing can generate that kind of pressure differential at this depth. Tell that to whatever's out there." The external floods flickered and died. Emergency lighting bathed the habitat's interior in red. Through the porthole, Helena could see nothing now, just her own reflection in the sapphire glass, eyes wide and face pale. Then something moved past the window. It was there and gone in perhaps 2 seconds, but those 2 seconds were enough. Helena's brain, trained to observe and categorize, recorded every detail with crystalline clarity. The thing that passed was segmented, each section easily 3 meters across. The surface was indeed scaled, but the scales were like nothing in any taxonomy she knew. Irregular, overlapping plates that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. And the color. Even in the dying light of their floods, she'd seen the color. Not gray or black like deep-sea life, but a blue so dark it was almost ultraviolet, shot through with lines of bioluminescence that pulsed in patterns that hurt to remember. "Did you see?" Marcus started. "Yes. What was?" "I don't know." The pressure normalized. The groaning stopped. The habitat's lights flickered back to full power. Helena checked the sonar. The contact was still there, still circling, but it had moved closer. 150 meters now. Thomas appeared from the dive chamber, his face grim. "I suited up, thought we might need to do an emergency ascent." "In a saturation habitat," Marcus stared at him. "We'd have to decompress for 6 days. We'd die. Better than the alternative." "What alternative? It's just circling. It hasn't actually—" The sonar pinged again. Helena watched the contact spiral inward. 100 meters, 75, 50. "It's coming in," she said unnecessarily. They waited. The habitat's air recyclers hummed. Someone's watch ticked. Helena realized it was hers and found herself focusing on that tiny, mechanical sound. Proof that time still passed normally, that the universe still followed rules. The contact stopped at 20 meters and held position off their starboard side. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. They stood frozen, hardly breathing, waiting for the hull to buckle, or the lights to die, or something to come smashing through the sapphire windows. Instead, Thomas said, very quietly, "It's looking at us." Helena wanted to tell him that was ridiculous, that something that large couldn't possibly be focused on their tiny habitat, that even if it was aware of them, it couldn't be looking at them because nothing at this depth had eyes. But she didn't say any of those things, because she could feel it too. The weight of attention, the sense of being observed by an intelligence vast and alien and utterly indifferent to their existence. Then the contact began to move again, not away, downward. Helena watched the sonar track it as it descended beneath them, beneath the seafloor that wasn't a seafloor. The acoustic signature changed as it went deeper, becoming diffuse and strange, until she could no longer tell where the contact ended and the substrate began. "It's underneath us," Marcus said. "How is it underneath us? We're anchored to—" The habitat tilted, not violently but unmistakably. 5 degrees, then 10. Alarms screamed. The three of them grabbed handholds as everything not secured began sliding toward the port side. "We're moving!" Thomas shouted over the alarms. "The anchors are holding, but the whole substrate is—" "Ascending," Helena finished, watching the depth gauge. They'd been at 11,100 meters for 3 days. Now the reading showed 11,095, 11,090, 11,085. They were rising, and they weren't doing it under their own power. Marcus fought his way to the engineering controls and began an emergency anchor release sequence. "If we can detach, maybe we can." "No," Helena grabbed his arm. "We're in a saturation habitat. If we lose our stable platform, we'll tumble. The pressure differential will crush us. We're already crushed if we stay attached to whatever's—" The ascent stopped. The depth gauge held at 10,900 meters. The habitat leveled out, groaning like a ship in a storm. Then, slowly, they began to descend again. Helena's mind raced through possibilities. The sonar contact had moved beneath them. The substrate, the thing they'd thought was seafloor, was now rising and falling, which meant the contact and the substrate were connected, or were the same thing, the same thing. The implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. The circling contact they'd tracked wasn't some creature swimming around them. It was part of something larger, much larger. And the textured surface they'd been anchored to for 3 days, the surface that stretched in every direction beyond the reach of their sensors. "Oh God," she whispered. "We're not on the ocean floor. Thomas was right. We're on something alive." As if in response to her realization, the habitat shuddered. The external floods came back online, and Helena found herself running to the porthole before she could stop herself. The texture was changing. The ridges she'd thought were like scales were moving now, rippling in coordinated waves that traveled across the vast surface. And between the ridges, in the valleys of that impossible flesh, things were opening. Pores, apertures, each one meters across, dilating like pupils, revealing depths of bioluminescent blue that pulsed with that same painful rhythm she'd seen before. "It's waking up," Thomas said from beside her. The habitat tilted again, more severely this time. 30 degrees, 40. Coffee cups and tablets and tools went crashing across the interior. Marcus was shouting something about ballast control. The alarms had become one continuous shriek. Through the porthole, Helena watched the landscape of living flesh continue its transformation. The pores were fully open now, and she could see movement within them. Things that might have been cilia or tendrils, each one thick as a man's leg, waving in currents she couldn't feel. And deeper, beneath the surface, structures were moving. She could see them through the translucent outer layers of skin, massive architectural forms that defied description. Not organs in any biological sense she understood, but something else. Frameworks of cartilage or bone arranged in geometric patterns, chambers that glowed with their own light, conduits through which fluids flowed in colors that had no names. "Helena," Marcus had her by the shoulders, pulling her away from the window. "We need to evacuate. The escape pod." "We'll do what, exactly?" She heard the hysteria in her own voice and fought it down. "Rise 15 kilometers through water that will boil our blood if we ascend too fast? Hope the pressure differential doesn't implode the pod? Pray that whatever we're attached to doesn't notice us leaving? Better than waiting here to die. Is it?" The question hung between them as the habitat continued its sickening roll. They were at 50 degrees now, nearly on their side. Helena could hear things breaking in the equipment lockers, the crash and tinkle of shattered instruments. Thomas had strapped himself into the dive station chair and was working the sonar controls with mechanical precision. "I'm getting readings now," he called out. "Full acoustic mapping. You're going to want to see this." Helena and Marcus strapped in beside him. The sonar display was painting a picture that her mind refused to accept. The contact they'd been tracking, SCP-7701-Bravo, was indeed part of something larger, much larger. The full acoustic profile showed an organism that extended at least 3 kilometers in every direction from their position. The shape was roughly elliptical, slightly flattened, with the massive circling appendage they'd first detected being one of dozens that extended from the central body mass. "That's impossible," Marcus said. "Nothing can be that large. The square cube law alone doesn't apply if the organism isn't using conventional biology," Helena said, her scientist's mind engaging despite the terror. "Look at the density readings. It's not solid flesh. It's more like a distributed network. Chambers and passages and structural elements with the density of cartilage, surrounded by tissue that's barely denser than seawater." "A living structure," Thomas said. "A living ecosystem," Helena corrected. "It's not one organism. It's millions, maybe billions, working in concert, like a coral reef, but mobile and integrated to the point where it functions as a single entity." "And we anchored ourselves to its back," Marcus said. "We drilled magnetic anchors into its skin and set up camp. Jesus Christ, we've been living on top of it for 3 days." The habitat's roll continued. 60 degrees, 70. They were going to capsize completely. Helena found herself doing the math automatically, calculating how long the reinforced hull would hold once they were inverted, how much air they had, how long before the pressure differential found some microscopic flaw and turned them into paste. Then the movement stopped. The habitat hung at 70 degrees for a long moment. Then, slowly, it began to right itself. 30 degrees, 20. Level. The alarms fell silent one by one. The emergency lighting switched back to normal. Through the porthole, Helena could see the textured surface had stopped moving. The pores were closing, the bioluminescence fading to a dim glow. "It knows we're here," Thomas said quietly. "It knows, and it's being careful not to crush us." "That's anthropomorphizing," Helena said automatically. "Is it? Look at the sonar. Look how the tissue around our anchor points has changed structure. It's reinforcing itself, supporting our weight. It's accommodating us." Helena looked. He was right. The acoustic profile showed a clear differentiation in tissue density directly beneath Trident Station, a platform of denser material that had formed since their last scan. The thing beneath them wasn't trying to shake them loose. It was making sure they stayed attached. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why would it care about keeping us safe?" "Maybe it doesn't," Helena said slowly. "Maybe it's just curious. We're probably the first thing with this much concentrated metal and technology it's ever encountered. It might be trying to understand what we are." "Or it's keeping us for later," Thomas added darkly. The communications panel crackled. All three of them jumped. Trident Station, this is surface vessel Archimedes. Do you copy? The voice was tinny and broken by static, but unmistakably human. We're receiving anomalous readings from your position. Depth sensors showing fluctuation of over 200 meters in the last 30 minutes. Please confirm your status. Helena lunged for the radio, nearly forgetting she was still strapped in. She fumbled with the buckle and grabbed the handset. Archimedes, this is Trident Station. Dr. Voss responding. We are intact but experiencing an emergency situation. Recommend you do not attempt any rescue or recovery operations at this time. Trident, we're reading you broken and weak. Did you say do not attempt recovery? Affirmative, Archimedes. We are in contact with an unknown biological anomaly, massive scale. Recommend you elevate this to Foundation Command immediately. Classification. She paused, thinking. Tentative Keter, possibly Apollyon if provoked. Apollyon. The classification reserved for entities that could end the world. She saw Marcus and Thomas staring at her. Trident Station, confirm you said Apollyon classification? Affirmative. The entity we're in contact with is at least 3 kilometers across and shows signs of intelligence. We are currently anchored to its dorsal surface. It's aware of our presence and has not attempted to dislodge us, but any external stimulus could change that. Archimedes, you need to clear the area. Get at least 50 kilometers away and await further instructions. Trident, we can't abandon you down there. You're not abandoning us. You're following protocol. This is Dr. Helena Voss, Security Clearance Level 4, Site 17 Xenobiology Division. I am invoking Emergency Directive 7701. Clear the area and escalate to command. That is an order. There was a long pause. Then, acknowledged Trident Station. Directive 7701 confirmed. We are moving to safe distance. Surface support will continue monitoring. Archimedes out. The radio fell silent. Emergency Directive 7701? Marcus asked. Probable extinction level event, Helena said. It gives us full authority to make containment decisions without oversight. She looked at both of them. Because oversight isn't going to help us down here. So what do we do? Thomas asked. Helena moved back to the porthole. The surface outside had resumed its slow, rhythmic movement. Not the violent undulations from before, but something gentler, almost like breathing. We observe, she said. We document, and we try to understand what it wants. What if it doesn't want anything? Marcus said. What if we're just irrelevant, bacteria on its skin? Then we're very lucky bacteria, Helena replied, because it could have crushed us already and didn't. She pulled out her recorder again and began speaking. Continued documentation, Dr. Helena Voss. Time is 23:45 hours. We have established that the entity we're calling SCP-7701 Alpha is a composite organism of unprecedented scale. Initial classification is Keter with potential for Apollyon upgrade. The entity has demonstrated awareness of our presence and has actively modified its behavior to avoid damaging our habitat. This suggests either intelligence or at minimum a sophisticated sensory system capable of detecting and responding to small-scale disturbances. She paused, watching the slow movement outside. The entity appears to be in a state of partial arousal. Whether this is its normal state or a response to our presence is unknown. Recommend that any future interaction be conducted with extreme caution. Any aggressive action could provoke a response that would be catastrophic, not just for us, but potentially for any vessels or structures in the surrounding area. Thomas had returned to the sonar station. Helena, you should see this. She joined him. The acoustic mapping had updated with new data. The massive form of SCP-7701 Alpha was still visible, but now there were other contacts appearing on the screen. Smaller, relatively speaking, but still large enough to be concerning. Dozens of them, rising from the depths below even the main entity. What are those? Marcus asked. Unknown. Size range from 20 to 50 meters, moving in coordinated patterns. Thomas adjusted the display. They're coming up through channels in the main body, like they're emerging from inside it. Helena watched the contacts rise. They moved with purpose, following paths that suggested intelligence or at least complex behavioral programming. Some circled the habitat at various distances. Others rose past them, heading toward the surface. Symbiotes, she said, or offspring, or both. SCP-7701 Alpha isn't just an organism, it's an ecosystem. Those could be anything from parasites to integral parts of its biology. They're getting closer, Thomas said. He was right. Several of the contacts had broken from the general pattern and were approaching Trident Station directly. Helena watched them close to within 10 meters, then 5. External lights, she said. Maybe we can see what they are. Marcus activated the floods. The darkness outside exploded into harsh white light, and they saw. The things approaching were like nothing in any database. Each was roughly cylindrical, 20 meters long and perhaps 3 meters in diameter. The skin was the same dark blue as the larger entity, shot through with bioluminescent patterns. But it was the front end that made Helena's breath catch. It looked almost like a face. Not a human face, not even close, but something that her primate brain insisted on interpreting as facial features. A cluster of sensory organs arranged in a roughly symmetrical pattern. Structures that might have been eyes, though they had no pupils and seemed to see in wavelengths far beyond visible light. Below them, an opening that dilated and contracted in rhythmic pulses. "It's tasting the water," Thomas said, analyzing our chemical signature. One of the creatures moved directly in front of the porthole. The opening at its front end expanded, revealing internal structures that glowed with pale blue light. Helena found herself staring into that light, mesmerized by the patterns that swirled within it. "Helena," Marcus said sharply, "look away." She did, tearing her gaze from the window. "What? The patterns? They're not random. I was watching the sonar data. Every time you looked at them, your heart rate spiked. It's doing something, affecting you somehow." Helena felt cold. She'd been trained to resist mimetic hazards, but this was different. More subtle, not forcing thoughts into her mind, but rather pulling them out, reading her. "It's communicating," she said, "or trying to. The bioluminescence isn't just for illumination, it's a language." "Can you understand it?" Thomas asked. "No, but I think it's trying to understand us." The creature maintained its position for another minute, then slowly withdrew. The others followed, descending back toward the main body of SCP-7701 Alpha. Within 5 minutes, all the contacts had disappeared from the sonar. "Did we pass some kind of test?" Marcus wondered aloud. "Maybe. Or maybe it just got the information it wanted." Helena checked the chronometer. Nearly midnight. They'd been in crisis mode for over an hour, running on adrenaline and training. Now that the immediate danger had passed, exhaustion crashed over her like a physical weight. "We need rest," she said. "Marcus, take first watch. 4-hour rotation, monitor sonar and pressure systems. Wake everyone if anything changes. Thomas, get some sleep. I'm going to compile our observations and prep a full report for when we can get a secure transmission to Site Command." "You think we'll get the chance to send it?" Marcus asked. "I think we're still alive, which means SCP-7701 Alpha wants us alive. That gives us options." She moved to her workstation and began typing. The act of documentation was meditative, helping her process what she'd witnessed. She described the creature's structure in clinical detail, speculating on its biology and behavior. She noted the coordinated response of the smaller entities, the careful way the main body had supported their habitat. And she tried to ignore the growing certainty that they were no longer in control of their own fate. Hours passed. Marcus watched his screens with mechanical precision. Thomas snored softly in his bunk. Helena typed until her eyes burned and her fingers cramped. At 0300 hours, the sonar pinged again. Marcus checked it, then checked it again. "Helena, we're moving." She was at his side instantly. The depth gauge showed them descending, slowly at first, then faster. 10,900 meters, 10,950, 11,000. "The entity is diving," she said, "taking us with it. How deep can this habitat go? What's our maximum rated depth?" 12,000 meters. We designed it with a safety margin, but we're past 11,500, Marcus interrupted. Still descending. Helena grabbed the radio. "Archimedes, this is Trident Station. If you're still in range, we need you to know we're descending past rated depth. Current depth 11,700 meters and continuing. If we don't resurface within 24 hours, assume total loss and implement containment protocol Delta 5. No response. They were too deep now for the radio to reach surface vessels. 11,900. Marcus said. His voice was steady, but Helena could see the fear in his eyes. 12,000. We're past maximum rated depth. The habitat groaned. A different sound from before, higher pitched, more urgent. The sound of metal and composite materials being compressed beyond their design specifications. Pressure's holding, Helena said, watching the internal gauges. Hull integrity still nominal. Whatever they used to build this thing, it's tougher than the specs suggest. Or we're being protected, Thomas said, awake now and strapped into his station. Look at the external pressure readings versus internal. The differential isn't as extreme as it should be. Something out there is buffering us. Helena pulled up the data. He was right. The external pressure at 12,200 meters should have been crushing them like a tin can. But the sensors showed a reduced pressure zone immediately around the habitat, as if something was creating a protective envelope. It's keeping us alive, she said, actively maintaining our survival. Why? Marcus demanded. Why go through the effort? Because we're interesting, Helena said, or useful, or both. The descent continued. 12,500 meters, 12,700. They were deeper now than any human habitat had ever gone, deeper than any manned submersible. They'd entered a realm of pressure and darkness that belonged to the alien entity alone. At 12,900 meters, they stopped. The habitat settled with a final groan. The pressure readings stabilized. Through the porthole, Helena could see nothing but absolute darkness. Even the bioluminescence of SCP-7701 Alpha's surface had faded. Sonar? She asked. Thomas worked the controls. We're in some kind of depression, a valley or trench within the larger body structure. The walls around us are showing as dense tissue. It's like we've been placed in a pocket, a protected space. A cage, Marcus said. Or a display case, Helena countered. We're being kept somewhere specific, somewhere it can study us without our interference. Then what do we do? Helena looked at her two companions. They'd all signed up for this, knowing the risks. Foundation personnel didn't get to opt out when things went wrong. They adapted. They survived. They completed the mission. Even when the mission had changed from repairing a cable to serving as specimens for an intelligence beyond their comprehension. We wait, she said. We observe. We learn everything we can about this entity. Because if we get out of here, the Foundation needs to know what's down here. Needs to know that there's something in the deepest ocean that makes whales look like plankton. Something that's been here possibly for millions of years, sleeping or dormant, and that we woke up. And if we don't get out, Marcus asked, then we make sure our data survives. The black box recorder is rated for 20,000 meters and can function autonomously for 6 months. Everything we're documenting goes into it. If the worst happens, eventually it'll detach and float to the surface. The Foundation will recover it. She returned to her workstation and continued typing, narrating into her recorder simultaneously. 3:45 hours. We have descended to 12,900 meters, far beyond rated depth, and have been positioned in what appears to be a depression or cavity within SCP-7701 Alpha's structure. The entity has created a reduced pressure envelope around our habitat, suggesting active awareness of our fragility and deliberate effort to maintain our survival. The hours that followed passed in a strange twilight existence. They maintained their watch rotations, monitored their systems, and documented everything. The habitat's air recyclers hummed, the pressure regulators hissed, the hull creaked and groaned like a living thing itself. At 0700, something changed. The darkness outside the porthole began to brighten, not with their external lights, those had been powered down to conserve energy, but with bioluminescence from the surrounding tissue. The patterns were different from before, more complex, more purposeful. Helena watched as the light intensified, forming shapes that flickered and flowed across her field of vision. Geometric patterns, spirals, structures that reminded her of circuit diagrams or neural networks, and underlying it all, a rhythm, a pulse that seemed to synchronize with her own heartbeat. "It's talking to us," she said. "How can you tell?" Thomas asked. "Because I can almost understand it." She pressed her hand against the cold sapphire glass, watching the patterns shift in response. They accelerated where her hand touched, forming new configurations that drew her eye and held her attention. And in those patterns she began to see meaning. Not words, nothing so crude as language, but concepts. Ideas communicated through light and rhythm and something deeper that bypassed conscious thought entirely. She saw depth, unimaginable depth, stretching down past the Mariana Trench, past the crust into the mantle itself. She saw time, eons of slow growth and patient waiting. She saw others of its kind, vast and ancient, sleeping in abysses around the world. And she saw hunger. Not for food, but for knowledge, for new experiences, for contact with minds different from its own. "It's been alone," Helena whispered, "for millions of years, just growing and waiting and sleeping. We're the first thing it's encountered that's complex enough to be interesting." "What does it want from us?" Marcus asked. Helena watched the patterns, trying to interpret, to understand. "It wants to know what we are, where we came from, why we're different." She paused. "It wants to know if we're like it." "Are we? I don't know. Maybe in some ways. We're both organisms that think and wonder and explore. We're both trying to understand a universe that's bigger than we are." The patterns shifted again, becoming more insistent. Helena felt a pressure in her mind, gentle but inexorable, as if something vast was trying to fit itself into a space too small to contain it. "It's trying to communicate more directly," she said. "I can feel it, like it's reaching out." "Helena, be careful," Thomas warned. "We don't know what exposure to this could do. It could be a mimetic hazard. It could rewrite your consciousness. Or it could be our only chance to establish communication." She kept her hand on the glass, maintained eye contact with the shifting patterns. "I'm trained for this. Let me try." She opened herself to the experience, dropping the mental barriers she'd been maintaining. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Concepts flooded her mind, too fast and complex to fully process. She caught fragments, impressions, pieces of something vast and inhuman trying to make itself understood. She saw the ocean not as humans saw it, a hostile environment to be conquered, but as home, as the only true reality. The surface world was alien to this entity, unimaginably harsh and empty. She saw the cable they'd come to repair not as technology but as an intrusion, a wound in the deep places, something that had to be investigated, understood, perhaps removed. She saw herself and her companions through eyes that perceived them as impossibly complex patterns of heat and chemistry and electromagnetic radiation. Tiny, fragile, fascinating, and she saw its question, repeated over and over in patterns of light. "What are you? What are you? What are you?" Helena tried to answer. She thought of humanity, of civilization, of the Foundation and its mission to protect and preserve. She thought of curiosity and wonder and the drive to understand. She tried to project these concepts back through the glass, through the light, into the vast consciousness that was reaching out to her. The patterns stilled. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then slowly, the bioluminescence began to pulse in a new rhythm. One she recognized instantly. It was mimicking her heartbeat. "It understands," she breathed. "It knows we're alive. It knows we're sentient. It's acknowledging us." The habitat shuddered, not violently, gently, almost carefully. They began to rise. "Depth decreasing," Thomas called out. 12,500, 12,000, 11,005. Helena kept her hand on the glass, maintaining the connection. The patterns outside continued their dance, and she continued to read meaning in them. The entity was releasing them, returning them to a depth where they could potentially survive on their own. "It's letting us go," she said. "It got what it wanted. Understanding, confirmation that it's not alone in being aware." "Will it let us leave entirely?" Marcus asked. "I think so, but I also think it wants us to come back, or to send others. It's been alone for so long. Now it knows there are other minds in the universe, even if they're small and brief and strange." They rose past 11,000 meters, 10,000. The habitat systems, which had been strained to their limits, began to function normally again. The pressure differentials normalized, the groaning and creaking stopped. At 9,000 meters, the ascent halted. The magnetic anchors released with a series of metallic clanks. They were free. Helena activated the ballast controls. "Taking us up. Slow ascent, controlled decompression. We'll need to stop at safe depth for saturation protocols." As they rose, she kept watching the sonar. The massive contact that was SCP-7701 Alpha remained below them, growing fainter as they climbed. but she could still see it, still feel its presence like a weight on her consciousness. At 5,000 meters, the radio crackled back to life. Trident Station, this is Archimedes. We have you on sonar. Confirm your status. Marcus grabbed the handset. Archimedes, this is Trident Station. 3 crew members alive and functional. Habitat integrity maintained. We are ascending under our own power and will reach decompression depth in approximately 2 hours. Copy that, Trident. We have a full Foundation containment team standing by. Site Command wants a full briefing as soon as you're topside. Understood, Archimedes. Be advised, the entity is still active at depth. Recommend establishing an exclusion zone of at least 50 kilometers radius around these coordinates. Classification remains Keter, but I'm upgrading likelihood assessment. This isn't a potential extinction event. It's a potential first contact scenario. There was a long pause. Trident, did you say first contact? Helena took the handset from Marcus. Affirmative, Archimedes. The entity we encountered shows clear signs of intelligence and attempted communication. It had us in its grasp for over 6 hours and chose to release us unharmed. It's not a threat unless provoked. It's curious, lonely, ancient beyond measure, and we might have just made the most significant xenobiological discovery in human history. Acknowledged, Trident. Command is going to have a lot of questions. So do we, Archimedes. So do we. They continued their ascent in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Helena kept recording, documenting every detail she could remember while it was still fresh. The patterns of light, the sense of vast consciousness, the feeling of being understood by something utterly alien. At 3,000 meters, Thomas spoke up. What do we tell them? Command, I mean. How do we explain what happened down there? We tell them the truth, Helena said, that the deepest parts of the ocean aren't empty, that there are things down there older than our species, older than our civilization. That one of them woke up and found us sleeping on its back, and instead of crushing us, it tried to say hello. They'll want to contain it, Marcus said. Study it. Maybe try to neutralize it if they think it's a threat. Then we make sure they understand it's not a threat, not unless we make it one. SCP-7701 Alpha could have destroyed us at any moment, could have crushed our habitat or dragged us down past our survival depth, or simply ignored us until we ran out of air. Instead, it protected us, communicated with us, let us go. You're talking about it like it's a person, Thomas said. Maybe not a person, Helena replied, but definitely a someone, a consciousness, an intelligence, something that deserves to be treated with respect rather than fear. They broke the surface at 1300 hours. The sun was blindingly bright after days of darkness. The support vessel Archimedes was waiting, along with 2 Foundation containment ships bristling with sensors and weapons. As they began the decompression process that would take the next 6 days, Helena stood at the porthole one last time, looking down into the blue depths below. Somewhere down there, deeper than light could reach, SCP-7701 Alpha had returned to its rest. But it knew now that it wasn't alone, that in the thin shell of air and light above the abyss, other minds existed, other forms of awareness, and someday, perhaps, they would talk again. She pulled out her recorder for a final entry. Dr. Helena Voss, final log entry for mission designation Trident Station. We have completed an unprecedented first contact with an entity of vast scale and apparent intelligence. Preliminary designation SCP-7701 Alpha is confirmed as Keter class, but I am recommending a new classification be considered. Not Apollyon, not Euclid. Something else. Something for entities that aren't threats to be contained but minds to be understood. She paused, searching for the right words. The abyss looked back at us, and it was curious. Helena switched off the recorder and watched the sunlight dance on the waves, thinking of the darkness below and the vast, patient intelligence that dwelled there. The Foundation would want answers, protocols, containment procedures, but some things, she thought, couldn't be contained. Some things could only be acknowledged, respected, and perhaps, if humanity was wise enough, befriended. The abyssal anchor had tested its moorings and found them adequate. The question now was whether humanity would be wise enough to maintain that connection, or foolish enough to sever it. Only time would tell. And in the depths, SCP-7701 Alpha had all the time in the world.